Hi, this is Mary Shucker-Austin with an overview of rabies prophylaxis and prevention from my experience treating animal bites in the emergency department. This video is educational and does not replace medical care. Rabies is a serious viral infection considered the deadliest virus on Earth. Rabies is part of a group of viruses known as lysoviruses. Bites and scratches of infected animals spread these viruses. Rabies is almost always fatal once symptoms appear. The good news is that rabies is preventable. The virus is usually transmitted through the bite of an infected animal. The most common carriers of rabies are wild animals. These include bats, raccoons, skunks, and foxes. Early symptoms of rabies can be similar to the flu. They include fever, headache, and general weakness. As the disease progresses, more serious neurological symptoms develop. These can include confusion, agitation, hallucinations, and paralysis. Prevention is key when it comes to rabies. Vaccination of pets and avoiding contact with wild animals are crucial steps. Post-exposure prophylaxis, or PEP, is a life-saving treatment. It is available for those who have been exposed to the virus. The virus is primarily transmitted through the saliva of an infected animal. The most common route of transmission is through a bite. The virus enters the body through the bite wound and travels through the nerves to the brain. While bites are the most common mode of transmission, rabies can also be transmitted through scratches or open wounds that come into contact with infected saliva or brain and nervous system tissue. In rare cases, rabies can be transmitted through organ transplants from infected donors. Once the virus reaches the brain, it multiplies rapidly. This leads to inflammation and damage to brain cells. The incubation period, which is the time between exposure and the onset of symptoms, can vary greatly. It can range from a few weeks to several months or even years. This is why prompt medical attention after a potential exposure is critical. Post-exposure prophylaxis is a life-saving treatment that prevents rabies infection after exposure. PEP involves a series of injections that include rabies immune globulin, or RIG, and the rabies vaccine. RIG provides immediate antibodies to fight the virus, while the vaccine helps the body build its own long-term immunity. The development of PEP revolutionized rabies prevention. Before PEP, a rabies diagnosis was essentially a death sentence. The first rabies vaccine was developed by Louis Pasteur and Emile Roos in 1885. This vaccine was a significant breakthrough in the fight against rabies. It has saved countless lives worldwide. Today, PEP is highly effective in preventing infection if administered promptly after exposure. After a potential rabies exposure, a prompt and thorough risk assessment is crucial to determine the need for PEP. Several factors are considered during the risk assessment. Different animals have different risks of carrying rabies. The circumstances of the exposure, was it a provoked or unprovoked bite? Was the animal acting strangely? The geographic location. Rabies prevalence varies by region. The vaccination status of the animal. Vaccinated animals are much less likely to transmit rabies. Based on the risk assessment, healthcare providers determine whether PEP is necessary. Section 5. Public health guidance. Navigating exposure scenarios. Public health authorities play a vital role in guiding rabies prevention and control efforts. They provide recommendations on post-exposure prophylaxis, manage animal surveillance, and promote public education campaigns. Local health departments are valuable resources for guidance on managing potential exposures. They can help assess the risk, determine the need for post-exposure prophylaxis, and provide information on rabies testing for animals. Public health officials also work to educate the public about prevention. This includes promoting responsible pet ownership, vaccinating pets, and avoiding contact with wild animals. Collaboration between healthcare providers and public health authorities is essential for effective rabies prevention and control. Section 6. Animal encounters. Evaluating bites, scratches, and non-bites. Not all animal encounters carry the same risk of rabies transmission. The type of exposure influences the need for post-exposure prophylaxis. Bites are the most common route of rabies transmission. The severity of the bite, the location on the body, and the species of animal all factor into the risk assessment. Scratches from rabid animals can transmit rabies if the animal's saliva contaminates the wound. However, the risk of transmission from scratches is lower than from bites. Rabies transmission through non-bite exposures is rare but possible. Contact with a rabid animal's saliva or nervous system tissue through mucous membranes like the eyes, nose, or mouth, or open wounds can pose a risk. It is essential to seek medical attention after any potential rabies exposure, regardless of the type. Healthcare providers can assess the risk and determine the appropriate course of action. Section 7. Animal observation and testing. Determining rabies. Risk. When a person is bitten or scratched by a domestic animal like a dog or cat, the animal is usually observed for a period of time to monitor for signs of rabies. If the animal remains healthy during the observation period, it is unlikely that it transmitted rabies at the time of the bite or scratch. Wild animals, on the other hand, are typically euthanized and tested for rabies if there is a potential human exposure. This is because observing wild animals for signs of rabies is unreliable. Testing for rabies involves examining brain tissue for the presence of the virus. If the animal tests positive for rabies, post-exposure prophylaxis is necessary for the exposed person. Animal observation and testing are crucial components of rabies prevention and control. They help determine the risk of rabies transmission and guide decisions about post-exposure prophylaxis. Bats are a significant reservoir for rabies in many parts of the world. Bat bites can be very small and difficult to notice, making it important to consider rabies post-exposure prophylaxis, or PP, even if a bite is not readily apparent. Any direct contact with a bat, such as finding one in your home or having one land on you, should be considered a potential rabies exposure. It is crucial to avoid handling bats and to contact animal control or a wildlife rehabilitator if you encounter one. Because bat bites can be so small, PEP is often recommended even if a bat bite is not confirmed. This is especially true if a bat was found in a room with a sleeping person, a child, or a pet. Bats are fascinating creatures that play important roles in our ecosystems, but it's important to admire them from a distance and to take precautions to prevent rabies exposure. In rare cases, rabies can be transmitted through organ transplants from infected donors. This highlights the importance of screening organ donors for rabies. Healthcare workers are also at risk for potential rabies exposure, particularly those who work with animals or in laboratories handling the rabies virus. Hospitals and laboratories have protocols in place to minimize the risk of rabies exposure. These protocols include using personal protective equipment, following safe handling procedures, and ensuring that healthcare workers are vaccinated against rabies. Rabies prevention efforts extend beyond the general public to include specific measures for organ transplant recipients and healthcare workers. Preventing rabies relies on a multifaceted approach that involves vaccination, public education, and responsible pet ownership. Vaccinating pets against rabies is one of the most effective ways to prevent the spread of the virus. Vaccinated pets act as a barrier, protecting both humans and other animals. Public education campaigns raise awareness about rabies, its transmission, and how to prevent exposure. These campaigns often target specific groups, such as children, outdoor enthusiasts, and pet owners. Responsible pet ownership includes keeping pets up to date on their rabies vaccinations, keeping cats indoors or on a leash, and avoiding contact with wild animals. Rabies infection remains a serious public health threat globally, especially in developing countries with limited access to healthcare and vaccination programs. While rabies is a deadly disease, it is preventable. Understanding how rabies is transmitted, recognizing potential exposures, and seeking prompt medical attention are crucial for preventing this fatal infection. Vaccination of pets responsible pet ownership, and avoiding contact with wild animals are essential steps in protecting ourselves and our communities from rabies. By working together, we can continue to make progress in the fight against rabies and strive for a world free from this deadly disease. Subscribe to the Social Media NP to leverage social media to improve healthcare one subscriber, one post, and one share at a time.